Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to do in this video. One, I want to introduce variables. That's kind of like one of the main topics of this video. But I also want to introduce the concept of comments and how to print formatted output. So a comment is very simple. So you do the pound sign, and then I'm going to type this is a comment. And what's going to happen is basically nothing. When the Python interpreter reaches this line, any line that starts with a pound sign like this or a hashtag, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to ignore that. So if I run this, it's going to do nothing because nothing was done. On the other hand, if I want the line below it to also be a comment, this is not going to be a comment, even though I want it to be a comment, because it does not start with a pound sign. So if I run this, I'll get an error. Okay, so if I want this to be a comment, I just have to do like that. Okay, the next thing that I want to introduce is output. So one of the first things that you typically do in a programming class is to write a hello world program. We're going to do that now. Hello world, like this. Okay, so what's happening here, if you put something in a string, or sorry, if you put something in quotes, Python interprets it as a string, which is a certain data type. We'll learn more about that as we go on, just kind of naturally in Python. And Python knows that if you have print and then a string in here, it knows how to print this out right underneath it. So if I run this code, all it's going to do is just going to say hello world without the quotes. So hello world. Now, often what's helpful is that we want to include numbers in our output. So I could say something like 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. I could do this. And if I run this, I'm going to get 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Or 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. And if I run this, I'm going to get something like that. Okay, but I want us to think about two different cases here. What if I don't want to print out 7 divided by 2 is 3.5? What if I want to print out 8 divided by 2 is 4? If I do that, I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to change it every single time. Okay, so let's do a couple of things here. In order to get to the, I'm going to make a couple of changes here. So the first change that I want to make here is, instead of saying 8 divided by 2 is 4, I want to introduce the concept of variables. Okay, so I'm going to say a is equal to 8. Now what this means is Python has created a little place in memory, and it has placed the number 8 in that little place in computer memory. And if we want to access it, we just press the number 8. So I'm just going to run this code. Nothing is going to be different. But now if I come down here and press A and run the code, A is equal to 8. Whoops. Okay, I could change A down here. I could say A is equal to 11. And if I run this code, it's just going to put now 11 in the variable A. And if I run this code, A is now equal to 11. Okay, so now what I want to do up here, instead of writing 8 here, I want to write A. But if I just put A here, since it's in the string, Python is not going to recognize it as this variable here. It's just going to recognize it as the letter A, since it's in the string here. So if I run this code, it's just going to say A divided by 2 is 4. Okay, so to fix that, if we want to kind of use variables in a string, we're going to do open brackets or open brace, close brace there. And at the end of the string, we're going to do dot format, and I'm going to put A here. Now what this tells Python to do, or what this is telling, we're telling Python what we want to do, it says interpret this as a string, and in this first curly bracket here, I want you to put whatever A is. In this case is 8. So if I run this code, I'm going to get 8 divided by 2 is 4. Okay, so that's great. But now let's say I want to change the 2 as well. So B is equal to 2. So I'm going to put another curly brace here. If I run this, let's just see what happens if I run this. Okay, we have an error here because there's 2 brackets, but I only put one number here. So I'm going to do comma B here. And the way that it goes, the way Python does this, it just fills, the first bracket is that A, the second bracket is that B, and so on and so forth. Okay, and of course, finally, I don't want to, if I change the 8 and the 2 here, I don't want to have to come down and manually change this. So I'm going to put a curly bracket here. And now I can actually just write b divided by a here. Sorry, b divided by a here. No, a divided by b. A divided by b. And if I run this code, I'm going to get 8 divided by 2 is 4.0. If I want to do the floor division, obviously this statement is not going to be true. I could do that as well. But anyways, okay. 8 divided by 8 divided by 2 is 4.0. So there we go. Okay, so now this gives the basics of variables, getting output, and comments I mentioned before. Let's do something a little more challenging. Let's try to compute the zeros of a given polynomial. So one way to use comment is to say what a cell is doing. So this cell is computing the zeros of the polynomial x squared minus 2x minus 1. Okay, and I'm going to store, so I'm going to use a quadratic formula, and I'm going to create two variables called x1 and x2. x1 is going to have the lower root. That is the root corresponding to the minus sign, I should say. So x1 is going to be equal to minus b. Okay, so I'm using a and b up here, but there's going to be different a's and b's down here. So minus b, so b is minus 2, so it's going to be 2 minus the square root, so math dot square root of b squared, which is going to be 4, minus 4ac, so 4 times a, which is 1, times minus 1, like this. And then this whole expression gets divided by 2 times a. But a is just equal to 1 here. And then x2 is going to have the bigger root, so x2 is going to have the bigger root. So we're going to have something like this. I'm just going to run it just to make sure I have all the parentheses and stuff correct, which I do. And now down here I could say now let's just say this. x1 equals curly bracket and x2 equals curly bracket dot format x1, x2. Okay, so when I run this code, again, it's going to take the value of x1, which we have assigned to it there, and put it in that bracket. It's going to take the value of x2, which we've assigned up here, and put it into that bracket. And when we run it, we get this. Okay, and so those are the zeros, x1 and x2. But now, see, what can computers do well for us? Computers can do tedious instructions very well, and they can store a lot of information very well. So they can do tedious computations well, repetitive tasks well, and they can store computations well. So we might ask ourselves, what is so important about this polynomial? Why not just write this cell here so that it works for any polynomial? So to avoid a little bit of confusion, I'm going to delete this. And let's just say in this cell, I want to find the zeros of the polynomial ax squared plus bx plus c. So here, a is equal to 1, b is equal to minus 2, and c is equal to minus 1. That gives us the same polynomial that we had before. So now I'm going to come down here to the quadratic formula and just use the typical, format of it, minus b plus or minus the square root, so on and so forth. Okay, so we've got minus b minus the square root of b squared. So b squared minus 4 times a times c, and all of this is going to be divided by 2 times a. And if I've done everything, 2 times a. And if I've done everything correctly here, the output should not change at all because the input is basically the same. It's the same polynomial, ax squared minus 2x minus 1, and it does stay the same. But now what this allows us to do is, what if instead of doing that polynomial, I want to do the polynomial with a 10 as a leading coefficient? I can do that as well. Now, one thing that might go wrong is if we have something like, hold on a second. If, let's say, I want to find the zeros of the polynomial x squared plus 1. So x squared plus 1, so b would be equal to 0, and c would be equal to 1. There's going to be a problem here because I'm doing this square root thing here, and I'm going to have a negative discriminant. So I'm going to get an error if I do this. And then we'll see in other videos how we might handle an error like this, or different ways we can, we can deal with this problem. Okay, but if I go back to something like I had before, I get, whoops, what did I have before? I'll make this 0 and this -1, just to give us something that we can look at. Okay, so at any rate, what we now have is a cell that, as long as we change A, B, and C here, is going to give us the roots of any polynomial. And so this is what I mean by it being a very good calculator. You could do all of this on your calculator. Like, obviously, you can do all of this on a calculator or even a 4-function calculator, since most 4-function calculators actually have 5 functions, the 5th one being the square root function. But the idea here is that now I can just use this. If I want to compute zeros of different polynomials, I just change the A, the B, and the C. Okay, and this is essentially what your homework is going to be. Your homework assignment is going to be write a cell like this that computes some sort of formula. You're going to have a certain number of variables here. You're going to have to use a function from the math library and then print out the format that looks something like this. In the assignment, you will see more detailed instructions. Okay, but I think that's all that I want to talk about today. Again, as you're watching these videos, it'd be great if you could kind of follow along with your own code and type stuff in as I'm going. And then also another very good thing that you should be doing, or that I think it's a good idea if you do, is to experiment. What happens if you change things around? What happens if you have 3 variables? What happens if you want to find a formula for the cubic? If you want to have the cubic formula for the zeros of a polynomial, stuff like that. These are things that I want you to be thinking about. Just going a little bit beyond on your own what I'm doing in the class, just to get a feel for how the programming works and how you can do stuff like that. Okay, today is Thursday. I'll be posting an assignment. Again, it'll be a very short one, since I got this posted much later than I ordinarily would have liked to have done.